Hi, everyone, and welcome to I think we have an audio. Someone's on audio. There we go. Welcome to the top 10 ways to convince IT and your boss. Today, we'll be specifically talking about how to convince your boss and or the director of IT on specifically purchasing a software that you believe will benefit you and your department. And while I introduce the team, please feel free to use that chat feature you see on the right-hand side of your window. Say hi, let us know where you're from, and what kind of software maybe you're looking to purchase this year. So a quick intro of ourselves. I'm Rachel Pradhan, Director of Marketing for Ease, and our top product, Beacon Quality, which is a mobile auditing application for layer process audits. And with me today are two techie guys that will be able to help you all understand how to prepare for talking to IT. And they are Richard Ruiz, who's Director of Technical Sales, and Chris Xu, Director of Data Science. Say hey, hi, guys.
Hi. Hello. Good morning.
Great. And let's see who has joined us. Hello, Tristan and Carol. I see Heaven and David there. And of course, Richard is there quite a lot.
I'm just happy this morning. Hey guys.
That's great. That's great. Well, let's dive into what we're going to be talking about today. So 3 basic things. First thing is we're going to go over the top 10 ways to convince IT or your boss. And then we do have a bonus one that Richard wanted to throw in there. So excited about that. And then we'll open it up to Q&A. Now, but really it's open all the time. So you can use that chat feature you see on the right-hand side there to ask any questions, leave comments. If you find something is really beneficial, let us know. We want it to be an interactive and useful webinar for you guys. So with that, let's take it away with the top 10 ways.
Oh, okay, great. So Rachel's pointing at me. All right. So I guess that means I'm on. Yeah. So really, the where I like to start, and just a little bit of my background is I was a software developer for the state of California for a while. I worked for Microsoft for a while. I was a director of IT for a bit, and I'm also a user of software. So I kind of have seen it from all angles. I consume software, I use software, and I've developed software. So that's kind of where we're coming from, and I just like to start with the why. Why do you want this software? Why are you bringing it up? It doesn't matter really how innovative or amazing your solution is. Senior management is going to nix it unless they understand why you're bringing it. So really having a pain-led conversation and defining, where you are, where you're trying to go, and then defining that gap that you're trying to address with that solution. So really, so what are some examples of a why? A lot of times we get too much in the weeds too early in that discussion. So kind of saying, what are some strategies, big picture strategies, take a step back. Are we trying, is it cost savings? Are we trying to increase visibility? Is it strategically big picture? Let's take a step back and really define, that.
Right. And the 2 bullet points up there are for why are meeting company goals. And that's your why of why you want this particular software.
Yeah.
And it's not just that it'll help you get stuff done faster, things like that. But what other goals, what will help you to accomplish those company goals? And then there's the boss's why.
Yeah.
What is going to help them solve their problems? How is this software going to help them solve those problems?
Yeah, and I think that's important, Rachel, that like everyone's why is going to be different. So kind of putting yourself in the boss's shoes, in your IT, your IT department's being pulled in so many different directions by government regulations, customer regulations, network limitations, technology limitations. So kind of put yourself in an empathetic position to really understand where each stakeholder is coming from. I think that's key in defining that problem and setting those metrics. All right.
All right. So then let's go to number 2 then.
Yeah, and so I think that this is Chris, and
Hi,
so
Chris.
obviously the next logical step in this conversation is this concept of calculating ROI. And so I think for us, we've got a pretty classic calculation up on the slide, but ultimately you have to start to think of a software solution from the perspective of return on investment. And return on investment covers a lot more than just raw cost of the software.
Yep.
You have to start talking and thinking about things like, how long is this software going to take to implement? How long is this software going to take to train yourself and your staff and whoever will be using it? What is the return on investment your boss will receive from the purchasing of this software? Will your customers benefit from the software? Will your data benefit from the software? And really just picking apart each and every element of what this software is going to get for you and your company, and understanding where that return on investment comes from. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, those are the things that are going to matter the most to your boss and to your IT team.
Yeah, like I think a lot of times we focus as on price of the software, right? Almost exclusively,
Yeah.
how much does it cost? But when we're talking about what does cost mean, right? There's so many different elements to that and really in this equation, the benefits got to be you'll also the benefits. Sometimes we limit the benefits of a software and not really think through how soft cost, hard costs. How is it going to help in replacement costs and cost avoidance? So really, it's this is the way it really helps to define these terms very take a lot of time to really think through all of the benefits and put hard numbers to those if you can. Where are some ways that you've seen that people can get those numbers from?
Yeah, I think one of the things that a lot of times people overlook is the value your boss will place on your time. And for me, even when I've been in the position of having that purchasing power and approving these types of purchases, some of the biggest selling points for me as a software purchaser were when I discovered the amount of time that my employees would save by implementing the software in the long term, right? Getting that time back from your employees' perspective, and really understanding what time am I losing to not having this solution in place, and being able to communicate that in an effective way, I think is a huge return on investment that people tend to not fully calculate.
Great. Now, but the same is on the cost side as well, right? Like if it's a lot of times on that cost side of the house, we just go, okay, the price of the software is $100 a month, or $5,000 a year, or $10,000 a year. But there's so many numbers behind that. What do you guys think are ways to quantify that cost as far as the total impact to the customer or to us as a software purchaser from that side of the house?
Well, we're going to get a little bit deeper into the cost in a little bit,
Okay.
but as far as
Okay.
the benefit, we can look at like defective parts,
Yeah, there you go.
workers' comp. What's the cost of wrong data? What's the cost of when you can't trust the data because there's so much double entry and impossible errors?
That's huge, because when you're making decisions based on bad data, wow, how much does that cost in the long term? So absolutely. So that's like the opportunity cost, right? The cost of not doing it means that, number one, we're going to rely on bad data, which means we're not going to have data-driven conversations. We're not going to have data-driven decisions. So it really, very difficult to quantify, but we at least need to take a stab at it and put it into this calculation, I think.
Great.
Kind of leads us to our next conversation point surrounding data, right?
Yes, sir.
Definitely.
All right. So, and that's really where we want to go is how do we use data to tell the story? Traditionally in IT, you're going to say, how can I, bring some credibility to my business justification to my boss? Because my boss is going to say, okay, well, give me some hard numbers. And it's our job as in the business unit to say, okay, I'm going to gather that from the web, maybe from references, from industry review sites. G2 Crowd is fantastic. Have you guys gone on G2 Crowd?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What have you guys seen? Have you guys found that useful?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny. We work for a software as a solutions company, right? So obviously we're in the software business, but we also use and buy software.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's what
we're consumers also.
I have been in the position even here at Ease where we were evaluating software for our needs, and G2 Crowd was a resource that we used to see industry statistics, peer reviews, really assess the software at a high level. And so, and tools like Capterra as well are great for that. Were very helpful for me in assessing, for instance, we assessed some business intelligence tools about 1.5 years ago. And if you've ever assessed business intelligence tools like Tableau or Power BI, you'll learn very quickly how many there are. And they all claim to do the same thing. So if you go
and they're all the best.
If you go to their website, that's exactly right. They're all the best. They're all going to change your life forever. They all have the best costs, even though they never tell you the cost. And there's nothing wrong with them. And so being able to go to a site like Capterra or G2 Crowd brought some reality into that conversation and helped us assess it from a more agnostic viewpoint, which was great.
Yeah, and I know like most of our customers are in the auto industry, so one or in the aerospace manufacturing communities. And one thing to keep in mind is also that different verticals have different expectations on software as well, because you have different pressures on you. So if you guys see glowing reviews of one product versus another, just also keep in mind in industry vertical as well. Mm-hmm. So case studies are fantastic, but my personal favorite is just word of mouth. Don't be afraid to ask your vendor for a reference if you don't have a reference, but really reach out to your local community. You'd be surprised how how a peer group in another plant or even a different company will share their experience. More than happy to share that experience. And likewise, it would be great if all of us could do that. If everyone listening could do that as well. Just be ready to share your opinion. Really, to drive these types of conversations, I think is very helpful.
Definitely. I'm just I know, Chris, you want to say something, but I also want to ask our audience here. How have you used data to tell the story? Do you go to websites like Gartner, for example, to get industry analyst data or information. What have you guys done also for being able to calculate that ROI, which was the slide before? So while they're answering,
Go ahead and type it in. We're all ears or eyes.
All eyes, exactly. I think so. The impetus of this conversation is to talk about how we convince those decision makers that we deal with on a daily basis how to purchase software or when to purchase software, especially if that's a software that meets our need. And so I think another important element of this point that we're talking to is this concept of understanding what data you don't have.
Ooh, that's a good
and
one.
so,
Yeah.
I think this is especially true of organizations that maybe are operating in a pen and paper environment, maybe whether that's auditing or whatever it is that you do, and you're utilizing some sort of solution that isn't reliant on software. When you really dig into that, it can become pretty astounding the data that you were missing, right? Whether that's real-time data or historical data in regards to your processes and procedures, where things have gone wrong, where things have gone right, how reliable is the data that you have today, especially if it's done in a pen and paper environment, and really truly grasping what that data is that you don't have and being able to relay that to your decision makers is probably going to be one of the most powerful stories that you can tell in regards to justifying the purchase of a software solution.
So the data you don't have can actually tell a story as well.
Yeah.
I think and that just goes to, how do you know that without trying it? And I think that goes to, does the software have a trial? Is there a trial period so that you can at least begin to understand that when we implement the software, it's not just the software, but maybe there's an emergent quality that comes out of it, that it's like, wow, we didn't realize that we would get this kind of data from this software, and then build that from your trial or your pilot, and then take those learnings and then extrapolate those across your entire organization to come up with the cost justification as well. I think that'd be a smart way to go.
All right, number 4.
Yeah, so this is always the scary one for a lot of people, especially if you're not a technical person, and the daunting reality that when you start talking about purchasing software, your IT team is going to get involved, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
And so I think, for us, I think the impetus of this slide, of this point, was to remind people that there is an element to purchasing and implementing software that you should always be aware of, and those are the technical requirements and security considerations. And so one of the things that we haven't talked a lot about yet, but it bears noting here, is that there is a difference between software as a service and building it out yourself or using localized software.
What does software as a service mean? Can you just describe what that means for some of the folks?
Yeah, so we're a software as a service company. That means that we provide a software that meets a specific service, and more specifically in the tech industry, SaaS companies are referring to companies that offer what are referred to as web applications. So our software lives in the quote unquote cloud, that thing no one understands. And it means that it's accessible to you as a consumer, via a common internet browser. There's no installation of software that needs to take place on your local machines.
So
or
no servers,
all of that's maintained by us, right?
Okay.
So, and that it's arguably the way of the future in terms of software. I mean, that's more and more you're going to see these cloud-based software solutions being what's offered to you out there. But you need to understand what the needs are of your organization, because sometimes there are organizations who veer away from these types of solutions. But also there's a lot of benefits that come with the software as a solution service. Having those things handled by a third party so that you don't have to handle them yourself can become a really big benefit to not only you, but your IT team. So when we start talking about things like compliance and certifications, right? What kinds of compliances and certifications are your organization held to? And does the software solution that you're looking at adhere to those same compliances? How do they handle data? How do they access data? What is the uptime and downtime? What kind of encryption protocols are in place for that data? These are all the types of questions that your IT team is going to have. And if you are utilizing a software as a service solution, they should be prepared to answer those. And they also take a bit of the responsibility, right?
Yeah, but that sounds pretty scary if you're not in IT. So like what advice could you give someone who does want to use a SaaS-based product? Like how should they be prepared to have that conversation with their IT is going to, first of all, why would IT be scared of the cloud if they are? Some IT companies may be scared. And then how can a customer or how could we as a business unit, what do we have to do to prepare for that conversation? Would you say any advice you can give?
Yeah, I think my biggest advice there is to involve your IT team in the conversation as early as possible, right? I think a lot of people avoid including them in the conversation
because they're scared.
They start looking at software and they're either scared or they don't think about it, right? And so I think understanding that your IT team will have a voice in whether or not this solution is purchased and ultimately used is important for you as the consumer. Yeah. And you should include them in the conversation as early as possible, right?
Yeah, you're not wasting their time.
That's right? How you're going to understand your organization's needs too, right? As far as why they would be scared, I think it's ultimately a loss of control, right? So they're, but to us as the consumer, I think that's our benefit, right? This idea that we don't have to be held responsible for server uptimes and downtimes and or purchasing a team to manage that software on a daily basis. This goes back to that return on investment and helping convince your boss, right? There's a lot that goes into maintaining a proprietary software, and a SaaS-based solution can take a lot of that off your plate.
We did have a quick question about encroachment. What did you mean by that? I can't remember the context that the encroachment was.
I think Chris said it.
Did we say encroachment, or are they asking what encroachment is?
I know encroachment in football is when somebody does like a false start. I can't.
She can't remember the context either. Well, maybe
That's
it'll come up in another mention. But there's a couple other key words that an IT person might ask, such as that I'd like for one of you to kind of help.
Oh, we said encryption.
Encryption.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Not encryption. So I'll try to speak more clearly. We were referring to encryption protocols. So that's encryption protocols, meaning how do you protect your data and how do you protect the people who are connecting to your software?
Yeah. So what keeps us up at night in IT is somebody having data that they shouldn't have access to, and so what we encrypt software both at rest. Maybe it's sitting in the cloud, maybe it's sitting on your device. But also in transit as it's going over the network. So there's multiple layers of encryption that's important to have. And your SaaS providers should meet, and your IT folks may have some requirements around that. So it's just important that you that you get your IT folks, like Chris said. I think that was a fantastic piece of advice. Get them involved early and often, so that they can address those ahead of time.
Absolutely.
What about things like data masking, multi-tenant? I know I've been asked those kind of questions when I've been asking for a particular software. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about those two things?
Sure. So I'll speak to data masking if you want to take on multi-tenant. So this idea of data masking really roots back to understanding your data and understanding what type of data you will be utilizing in the software, because data masking refers to this idea of essentially hiding data that would be considered personal information. So these are things like credit card numbers or social security numbers or addresses, phone numbers, personal email addresses. So if you have that type of data in the software that you're going to be using, let's say that's consumer data, customer data, or it's data of your employees, then when you start talking about things like connecting to databases or how the company that you purchase the software from utilizes that data, do they have data masking policies and procedures in place to protect that personal consumer data? And this goes back to, like, you may or may not have heard fancy terms like GDPR, which is a new European law centered around the protection of personal identifying data. So it has ironically, data masking has been around for decades, but it's become a much bigger buzzword these days
with those European standards,
with those types of things, with things like GDPR and things like that. So it may be something that you're worried about or heard about, or you may get asked about it from your boss. And so that, just to be aware of what that is. But again, I want to emphasize that it roots back to understanding your data, right? Because not everything needs to be masked, right? So if the data that is in your software is not personal identifiable information of consumers or customers, if it's not data that needs to be protected from a compliance standpoint, then there is such a thing as overkill in the world of data, right?
For sure.
And so you need to understand your data. You need to understand what's going to be in these software solutions so that you can intelligently speak to these policies and procedures.
Right. Yeah, and just if you guys were Rachel brought multi-tenancy, it's not something that you probably need to worry about. That would be a conversation that your vendor, your prospective vendor would have with your IT department. But in some cases, if you do have personal identifiable information, or PII, or if you take PCI, payment cards, transactions, then there are certain requirements where your instance of the software needs to be physically separate and not just a logical distinction between other customers. So a lot of times, if your software is in the cloud, you could have separate instances or separate operating systems that are completely on different computers in the cloud, or you can have a shared computer model where you share a database, but there's just a logical differentiation between customers. So that's something that would come up during your discovery with your IT department and the vendor.
Yes, we're saying multi-tenancy.
Tenancy, yes.
Yes.
You've got it, Elaine. You got it. Perfect.
And just one last thing about this, I would say, is to make sure you understand the what your company need, what kind of compliances does your company need to stay within. So like medical is going to have different compliances than aerospace and automotive. Just be aware of those things and what will be required. And again, like Chris was saying, talking to your IT manager or director is really going to help with that. All right.
We could stay on that slide for hours.
We could. So number 5, build it versus buy it.
Oh man, yeah. This used to be a very common question that companies would have. Do we do we create the software internally, or do we buy it, or do we buy it from a vendor and kind of outsource it? So this is increasingly, I think, as the software as a service model continues to take off, this is becoming less and less of a question, but you still may have to answer it. So what goes into building a modern software solution? There's you've got to maintain the software. You've got to provide updates, security updates. You have to every time you provide an update, you have to test it against all of your different endpoints. Does it work on Android? Does it work on iPhone? Does it work on Windows, Mac? Every time you make any change. Then you have to do penetration testing, for set security vulnerabilities. You make sure that
But penetration, say,
okay,
what does that mean?
Okay, great question. So pen testing, as it's called, is where you have you kind of take on, or your IT department takes on the persona of an attacker, of someone with a malicious intent, to see if they can penetrate your environment and maybe inject malware code, steal your information, and just look for vulnerabilities in the software. It's very expensive because security professionals in industry are very rare, very difficult to come across, and very expensive to hire. Then there's things like reliability. How much uptime? The industry target, is 5 nines of uptime is what we all go for. That means 99.999% availability for the software. That's what we all aim for. Whether we hit it or not, that's kind of the goal. And making sure that a homegrown application is up to that degree is very difficult to do. There's so many elements that go into that reliability statement right there. Now there are, for instance, we're in the auditing business and software as a service. Now, most folks have home built their solution, because what are they
To some
using?
extent.
Yeah, solution, quote unquote.
Right,
Right?
like an Excel or SharePoint.
Yeah, like a SharePoint document that
Right.
you put on a share, and then everybody just kind of inputs there. But that's a solution when you think about it. It is not a great solution. We could definitely improve it, but you still have those questions that need to be answered. Do we keep this? Chris brought up something. What's the data we don't have? And that's the question that you should be thinking about. What are we missing by doing it this way? We're missing standardization. We're missing a mobile app, visibility, security. All these different things should go into that decision. And because the benefits of going with a software platform are very large, and the costs are being driven down by not requiring network infrastructure, servers, programmers, penetration testers. That's all outsourced and commoditized at that point. This is becoming more and more less of a question. It's really because we don't understand the solutions that are out there. If customers had perfect information, I think they would have a lot more software as a service solutions, working with these types of problems.
Yeah, I mean, this slide is really sort of the culmination of everything we've talked about before, right? When we, especially the previous slide, there are certainly organizations that have the resources and the time to be able to do something like a build it. But what's fascinating is that even those organizations that have those resources are so often choosing to buy it instead. And I think this is because of, speaking to all those things that we've just said, the amount of resources and time and ownership that it takes to build a solution, to keep that solution maintained, to keep it free from security vulnerabilities, to make it reliable, to make it available across multiple platforms and multiple regions. It's a significant amount of work, it's a significant amount of commitment, and it's a significant amount of time that your organization could be using elsewhere, right? And so when we talk about ROI, it shines here almost better than anywhere else, right?
Sure.
It's, when we really look at what it would take to build out a solution like what these sophisticated SaaS solutions are offering.
So it's like in just the standardization bullet point there. I mean, imagine if you could standardize not just for your plant or your office, but if you can say, okay, we're all in our entire organization, maybe you have 300 plants around the world, we're all going to use the same solution. Imagine what kind of data that you don't have now that you could get if you could A/B test, for instance, a maturity model. How mature is the auditing process at this place? How good is our our CRM updates across our those types of questions that you always wished that you had an answer to. It's very difficult to get those emergent type questions unless you have kind of that standard implementation, everybody singing from the same hymn book, if you will, so that you're able to do apples to apples comparisons and ask those bigger type questions in real time.
Yeah.
Elaine just had a question about, will we be covering future portability of data?
Will we be covering future portability of data?
I can interpret that in different ways, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that was the technical.
Yeah, I'm interested. So will we cover future portability of data?
I guess
So
like
is that
if you do
mobility?
put data in the cloud, is it portable back down? Do I own my data, or can I move the data from my computer to the cloud, from the cloud to my computer?
Mhm.
How portable is the data?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's perhaps an ownership of
Oh,
data
she talks
question.
about,
Yeah,
she added a point here, being concerned about getting stuck with a platform.
Ah,
So I interpret that then, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Elaine, in the chat, as saying, you get into a relationship with a software provider, you use them for a certain amount of time, you collect a certain amount of data, and then for whatever reason you decide that it's time to move on to a different provider. What happens to my data? Is it lost? Is it theirs forever? Is it gone?
Yeah, that could be a scary position to be in.
It absolutely can. And I think, even to your third point here, data mapping to change software is painful. I don't disagree with you. It almost always is.
Sure
and there's probably some intentional design there with a lot of these
providers. Yeah, you're right.
But, I think ultimately you bring up a good point to be aware of. You bring up a point that is something that you should ask software providers about, what
ahead of time, right?
Exactly. Before you get into that relationship, right? What is their termination policy in regards to your data? What does that look like? Any software provider worth their salt is going to be able to answer those questions with a lot of authority and an understanding, right? I think good software as a solution providers will provide as easy as a possible exit from in regards to your data. And
if they don't, that's probably a red flag, right?
Policies like GDPR have made it so that we as software providers are actually required to make that data available. So in terms of ownership, like, you are entitled to your data to a certain degree. And I think it's important that you understand what that looks like, because it is different for every software provider. GDPR is a policy enacted by Europe, global data privacy. I can't remember the R. Requirement, actually, I believe is what it is. And so it's a policy that most software providers are having to adhere to in regards to data regulation, and specifically in regards to personal information.
Great questions.
Great. Let's see, next one here. Calculating total cost of ownership.
Ooh. Total cost. Yeah. Total cost of
Yeah. So I think this is, we're kind of breaking it down bit by bit. These slides are really building on top of each other.
Yeah.
I think I like this slide. I like this imagery, because I think this really speaks to the notion that when we as consumers get into the process of purchasing software, it's really easy to just look at that software at a surface level, and you can see that that imagery here, we look at it as the price of the software. How much is this software going to cost me on a monthly basis or a yearly basis or whatever that is? And when you really start to get into it, you start to understand that there's a very deep level of complexity that comes into purchasing and using software. And I think the reason this is important in the context of our conversation is that those decision makers in your organization, your quote unquote boss or your IT department, this is how they look at software.
Exactly.
Right?
There you go.
And so if you aren't looking at software this way, then you're gonna have a hard time convincing those decision makers.
They're not trying to be mean, right?
Yeah.
They're not trying to be mean. They're not trying to say, no, you guys can't have it. But I think Chris is absolutely right. This is the way that they see it.
Yeah. And so, and a lot of this we've already talked about, right? It's about things like security. What is it going to take to implement the software? What is the operational cost? What is our administrative costs on an ongoing basis? What happens if something goes wrong? What happens if, wherever those servers are located that house your software, what if there's an earthquake or a flood, or, something goes wrong, what happens? What does that uptime and downtime look like? What are the IT requirements regarding that software? Do I need hardware for this software? How am I going to train? How am I going to integrate? All these things are going to be the questions that your boss has, and they're the things that you have to be prepared to speak to with an authoritative from an authoritative perspective. You should have a clear understanding of these concepts.
Yeah, I think your business justification should have more value than the piece of the iceberg that's under sea level. And usually that's the case because we usually underestimate the price, but we also underestimate the benefits as well of getting the software. That's been my experience. But it's just really putting some thought and a lot of effort so that you are doing, that there's a perception and it is reality that you are doing your due diligence, that you've thought through the total impact to the company, both in costs, but also in the benefits that this new innovation will be driving as well.
Absolutely.
Just a quick point on the hardware costs. Like for our software, it's a mobile application. So are you going to have your employees use the mobile app on their phone that they bring to work every day? That's their personal device, or are they going to use the corporate phone, or are they going to some of our customers will actually buy iPads and things like that, and they'll have shared devices specifically for auditing purposes. So
or they'll buy like Amazon Fires and then just have like a checkout, or like the auditor comes in and just they have like a bank of 20 iPads or 20 Android devices, and then the operator comes in and then just exchanges a government issued ID for the beginning of their shift, and then exchanges it once they complete their audit. Those are the types of things, and then even just the planning of that kind of stuff is something that you've got to think through as well.
All right, let's move on to scalability, which kind of goes into what we talked to, one of the bullet points that we had on slide 6 for calculating total cost of ownership.
Yeah, so scalability. What happens, especially with our particular software, our auditing software? What typically happens is that one plant in your organization goes, oh my gosh, we're having a lot of pain around a specific type of audit, and then they bring us in. They absolutely love the software, get a ton of value out of it. That's a good thing. But then they'll say, okay, now we want it across all of our Chinese plants, and we have 50 or 100 or 200 plants in China. What do we have to do to get those over there? It's really important that your software as a service vendor, or if if you guys are designing your own software platform, start with scalability in mind. what happens if 10 folks use the software and then everybody loves it, and then you go, okay, we want all of our users to have it. We have 1,700 folks in our plant, and we have a few thousand. How do we scale that up in our plant? So there's a concept of scaling up would mean users inside one building. So like that's a scenario I just gave you. Like if 10 start using it, everybody loves it, other departments start using it. Before you know it, 4,000 people are using your software. And then they're scaling out, which means scaling to our Mexican plants, scaling to our Canadian plants, scaling to South America, our Brazilian plants, scaling to China, European. And when you scale out, you have more. You have a few problems. You have is my data going to be accessible? Is it fast? What about regulatory pressures? Different countries have different regulations. So those are the types of things in the scalability that you've got to be concerned about, but also the capabilities of the software. So because I can have more plants, are there additional features that you need? Are there enterprise level dashboards that would support multiple plants, multiple offices, multiple warehouses? Are there extra features that will continue to drive value for those different conversations, for different roles within your organization as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that pretty much covers it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as far as talking to your vendor about that, of course, maybe there's one price for that first plant, but as you scale up, there's probably different price points, different tiers. Some of the other features that Richard was talking about might come into play as you have more plants and more business units on board.
Definitely something to think about there.
Yeah. So we're kind of coming out of the weeds a little bit and getting into some of the more high level, not basic, but these are the things that you should be thinking about. And so this next slide really talks about understanding your software solution provider's support model. What hours are they available? Do they have tiered support options? Do they include, I think this third bullet point is a significantly important part, and that is the training that they provide. What type of training do they provide when they're onboarding you as a client? Is that training ongoing, or is it set from the beginning? Is that an added cost? There are lots of software providers out there that will provide training if you pay for it, and only if you pay for it.
And sometimes even by the incident, right? I mean, like
Yeah.
Microsoft and some of the other vendors will charge you, $300 to $500 an incident.
Yeah, absolutely. And so really having a firm understanding of what that support model looks like before you purchase the software. And not being afraid to ask the questions of those software providers, because there are certainly some software providers out there who aren't as open with what this looks like, and perhaps it's because they're the types of providers that charge. But don't be afraid to ask these questions, because this really roots back to this is going to be your day-to-day with the software, right? When you have things that go wrong, because technology is amazing and great when it works, right? And so no matter what the software solution, you're going to have some sort of issue, or you're going to have a question. You're not going to understand how to use the software. You're going to need some training. You're going to need some insight, because it's a new solution. And if it's not you, it's going to be your employees or your boss or your customers. Right. And so this is the day-to-day. You need to understand what that looks like and how you can get the help when you need it.
And also considered like a train the trainer, right? Because if you bring in the software, you could be considered the expert. You've got to train your colleagues as well in using the software. There could be an element to that as well.
I would also make sure to ask about ongoing training that's in a group setting. So like a webinar for our software, we have ongoing webinar training, and then there's also online training. So asking about recorded webinars or videos, ask about the training library that's available as well.
All right. Now your boss is and your IT is going to say we need a couple of vendors to evaluate to show you've done due diligence. Now a lot of times, so well these are not necessarily apples to apples. I don't think you'll find two vendors that do the software exactly the same way, right? You could say that about anything. What about a car? Okay, and both a Toyota and a BMW and a Mercedes and a Hyundai, they all have four tires. They might have two doors. They have windows that roll down, but there's different costs, right? Because there's different requirements and different properties. Does it meet your requirements or not? And that's where creating a checklist of things that are important to you comes into mind, and we need to do our due diligence there. So definitely look for a trial. Maybe just there's a lot more that goes into it than just a price and just setting up 3 columns and say, okay, price 1, price 2, and price 3.
Right.
You wouldn't make any other decision in your life like that. You wouldn't do that based on a house you want to live in. You wouldn't say, okay, here's three houses. We're going to go with the cheapest one. The cheapest one in my life, whenever I've made, whenever I've gone with the cheapest one, I don't think that, from a price perspective, has been the correct decision necessarily. Maybe a couple times, but I was in college and I was short on cash.
So, and a lot of vendors will have a checklist of features so that you can at least say the top one that you really like, use that checklist against the others that you're doing the due diligence on.
Yeah, and on all the previous conversations, I think it's coming clear that there's a lot more to the price of the software. There's a big delta between the price of the software and the total cost of ownership or the total impact.
Great. Number 10. Trial. You kind of talked about it a little bit. But trial is really important. So trying it before you buy it. Some softwares only offer a demo. So kind of.
Yeah. So that's always a question: is do you do your trial first and talk to your boss, or do you bring your boss into the conversation in the beginning? And a lot of that is cultural, and it really is going to depend on your software, on your software requirements. A lot of times, getting your boss that interested ahead of time, they may not be that interested. But I would make every effort to get your boss involved immediately, early, and often. And I would really hesitate if your software as a service provider does not provide a pilot. They're probably, one, either hiding something, or two, they're just not set up for it. Or so it's just I would kind of be very hesitant. And I'm a very hands-on type of person, and like I would need to be able to see it. It's every software has limitations. I want to know that ahead of time so I can just make a smart decision. I don't want that to come out after I make the purchase. There's a question about data portability. Am I really going to invest in a company that doesn't have some sort of trial? So I need to be so comfortable with my data. If I'm going to trust my data with a customer, with a vendor, I would need to have the comfort and make sure that all my questions are answered before I make that decision.
Right. All right. So we have our bonus number 11 here.
Yeah, and this is just something I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of customers, and the most successful customers, at least folks, when you're trying to bring a new piece of software into your environment, is get your IT involved, like Chris mentioned, ahead of time, early and often. Get your boss involved. Get all of the key stakeholders together, and if you can, in a room. If it has to be via via web conference, that we'll do the best we can. But define the success together, because you don't want to stick your neck out, bring in this piece of software, and then everybody blames you, right? You want to make sure that everyone's questions are answered, that everybody has a voice, and they all have an opportunity to share their concerns, share their desires and their needs as well. Come up with a defined problem statement. Come up with with a current state definition, and then say, okay, blue sky, what would we want? What would we want the future to look like? And then take the time to write that out. What is your desired outcome? Map that delta, and then say, how far can we get using this new piece of software? But not just a piece of software, because every problem, we know technology can only solve some elements of a problem. It's going to take people as well, and it's also going to take equipment of some sort, right? So those three elements are going to be what is going to compose the solution. But you really need to define that end state, that metric ahead of time. And then 6 months down the line, when you're fully implemented, did we hit that mark? Where are we? Are we getting our desired outcomes? But not just that, then document the emergent benefits that we weren't expecting as well, because there will be those. And what happens is, after you go through a few cycles of these, bringing in new software, you begin to get better at making these types of decisions, and you'll engender confidence in doing it, and you'll be seen as a thought leader and the hero, the technology hero in your company, because you've defined a problem, you've looked at a solution, you've set up metrics, you hit them, and then you got a few extra with those emergent qualities that we were talking about.
And really kind of going back to slide number 1, where the whys. So why are we buying this software? How is it going to solve your problems? How is it going to help accomplish the company goals and solve your boss's problems? So making sure to actually quantify that in some sort of document and share it with the team that's going to help implement this software, so that when you go back 6 months, like Richard was saying, you can actually look at, okay, is the software helping us accomplish our goals like we thought it would? So you can really make sure that it's you're hitting that mark.
And do we hit it? And then share your experience with others in your community.
Exactly. So any questions, guys, out there? You can use the chat feature.
We've got a couple minutes left.
We do. And while you guys, if you have any questions, type it in there. There is a question about recording. Absolutely, that we're going to be recording this. We are currently recording this, and we will be making it available by tomorrow. So you can watch this with your team if you would like. And I also want to make a quick mention that next week we're going to launch our Champions for Quality Awards. This is our second annual Champion for Quality. And you can nominate yourself. You can nominate a colleague. We are going to have that open time frame for nominations through February. And then we're going to open it up for voting, just like last year in March. And then winners will be announced at the end of March, so that you can have time to plan to be with us here, actually in Orange County, California, for our live award ceremony, as well as our Beacon User Summit. And this year we're going to be focusing on layer process audits and how layer process audits help transform your organization. So if you have a great story, please be sure to share it before February 28th, and keep a lookout on your emails to see when that is open next week. So glad this was helpful for you, Heaven. Bill, do you have stats about the savings that can be expected with the software?
Yeah, we do have some stats that can help with that.
With our own person, with our software.
Yeah,
here at
with
Beacon
our
Quality.
for our company. Yeah, we do have white papers and a case study that will help you with the business justification.
And a lot of vendors on any software will usually have some sort of ROI document to help you with that.
Yeah,
Hopefully.
Yeah, but I also feel like it's important to emphasize, and we've kind of said this throughout the entire presentation without really saying it, and that is that a software purchase is very customized to your specific needs, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I think ROI is this is where that truth is very prevalent, because a big part of your cost savings are going to be about your organization and how you currently do things, and what you don't have at your disposal because of the lack of software, right? And a whole wide variety of things that we've just spent the last hour talking about.
Yeah.
Great.
But that being said, you should always have a baseline document to make sure
Absolutely.
that you're thinking in the right direction, for sure.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here with us today. We are at the top of the hour, and I want to be wary of your time. And thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to be with us here today. And a recording will be emailed to you by tomorrow. So thank you again. And if you ever have any questions or want that free trial of Beacon Quality, you can always go to our website, beaconquality.com.
Thanks, folks.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Have a great week.